guess two people are
All right. Thank you guys for coming. It starts pretty fast. Okay. Yeah, I wear a little bit. So anyway, let me get started. My name is Joaquin Baldwin. You guys, have you guys been to any of my presentations earlier? A couple of you guys, yeah, at least, yeah. So this is a little different. I'm going to talk specifically about cinematography and what we do in computer animation layout and how that kind of influences stuff and similarities with live action. And trying to get an idea of different terms and things that we use at different studios. They might vary from studio to studio, but they're useful to kind of have that in your brain and be able to talk about these things. So let's move on. Just to give you a quick idea, like my filmography, these are the films I've been working on. And one problem that I had is I do not have permission to show any clips from Disney. So I try to come up with examples for all these things with films that are as non-Disney as possible. Some of these might be owned by Disney by now, but we'll see. So if you actually want to see my own work, you can check my website, which is joaquinbaldwin.com. I have a couple things in there.
The Voodoo one won't be.
What's that?
The Voodoo video will be owned by Disney.
No, the Voodoo one is not owned by Disney.
I think they were a bit shaky on that now before Christmas, weren't they?
Yeah. So anyway, those are the films I worked on, and just to give you a quick idea, what I do at Disney is called CG layout, which is basically the cinematography for computer animated films. And in a way, we're thinking how to use the lens to tell a story, how to use the camera, how to use cutting, even sound. Sometimes, even though we don't edit the sound, we work with the sound that we get from the editorial department. And our role is to get the first 3D version of the storyboards that have been drawn by the story department and put them in a 3D space and try to interpret that. So it's kind of like classic cinematography in live action, minus the lighting aspect. We don't do any lighting other than temp stuff just to kind of sell a mood, but it gets replaced entirely. And it's not quite as fancy as live action cinematography, but there's some similarities. We do like to call ourselves cinematographers, even though it's a slightly different term. And what is a cognitive toolkit, which I think Shep had a hard time pronouncing? It's in a way is a set of concepts that will stick to your brain, and you'll be able to talk about these terms easier. Because sometimes you want to specify something that you've seen in the film, but you don't know how to explain it. But once you have a name for it, it becomes much easier. And yeah, it becomes part of your language. At some point, you start using it naturally without having to think about it. And it also can apply in different parts of your own field, like when people talk about warm versus cool. Once you got that concept in your brain, it's so easy to talk to other artists about what you mean without having to over-explain it. And it also makes you sound like a smart ass and like you're really smart about what you're talking about, so I always like that.
And sometimes people switch off because they don't know what you're on about.
Yeah. And also, I love this quote from Ursula. So there is a power of naming things. It's like knowing something is like being able to abstract and take from it and make it more tangible. And hopefully these concepts will serve you in your careers and everything else. So let me start with something. I'll start with something basic that maybe most of you have heard about, but not necessarily totally understand, but something that is dealt with in film school a lot. So the 180-degree rule, it's odd that it's not playing here, but it's playing there. So how many have you heard of this rule before? How many actually understand it? Okay, yeah, many arms dropped. So in a way, it's basically trying to say, if you have a setup with two actors, and you trace a line between them and say, never cross that line with the camera, and that way you always understand this character's to the left, that character's to the right. So for example, in this example from The Social Network, Justin Timberlake is always gonna, oops, mic drop. Is anyone out there? It's that. 1 second. Battery?
You have to shout, dude.
I can shout, but I don't know if you can hear me in the back. Kind of? Yeah. I'll get tired of shouting very quickly.
Pretend you're a language teacher. Pretend you're a language teacher.
Teacher, yeah. Just 1 second, guys. Sounds good. normal. So, in this example, if you look, Timberlake always to the right. When we cut to the other side, what's his face? Eisenberg? On the left. And you want to keep the camera on this side because obviously it makes things easier to read, and also if you cross that line, your cameraman will probably fall off the balcony and you get sued. But it's mostly about just trying to keep continuity and not confusing the audience. Let's move to something. So there's this clip from Paprika that actually explains it live.
Oh, love that film.
Is it? Yeah. So the way they do it here is very meta, where they actually, on purpose, cross that line to confuse people. And it looks awkward as hell, and that's the whole point. If you do that, it will look wrong. What you want is for it to look wrong and to feel uneasy, then you can do it on purpose. But in general, you should try to stick to what's clearer for the audience, unless you are breaking the rule on purpose. And then an example like this one, if you look, when there's a big revelation, what we do is, on purpose, use the camera move to shift the characters' positions. At that point, the power relationship between the characters has changed, and we indicate that by changing the position in screen space. So if you are going to break the rules, make it clear and make it on purpose, not just sloppy. Now, this one is a little harder to spot, but if you look at this clip, the good guy is always to the right side. The bad guy is to the left. During the shootout, there's this very smart pull-out where the good guy switches to the left, but we don't know that it's a good guy. We thought it's a bad guy shooting because the camera flipped to the other side on purpose. And it is only revealed during the zoom out. If you look over here, it's always gonna be here, and we're gonna think, is this guy shooting? But the pull-out is what reveals it. So it's totally throwing the audience off on purpose. It gives you a little rush of adrenaline. You think it's something happening, but it's something entirely different. And it's as simple as choosing, instead of shooting from this side, I'm gonna shoot from that side. And that creates that whole level of tension. This is awesome filmmaking in this film, by the way. It's everywhere. Another concept, just to move on. An iFix, this is a term we use at Disney internally. I don't know what other studios call it. But it's basically when you have a fast cutting sequence, you try to keep all the elements in the same position in screen space, so it's easier on the eye and you don't have to bounce back and forth trying to find what to read. Like in this example, like if you look where the arrow is pointing, that's where everything happens, even though it probably would have been more interesting to have the knights falling towards the left side of the screen because the explosion is to the right. But in a fast cutting sequence like this, it would have been too hard to read so quickly. And Lord of the Rings does that very cleverly because there's a lot of VFX stuff that where they can actually play with this over and over again until they get it right. If you look here, it's like, it's so easy to track Gandalf. It's not going to be popping around in different places, so you know exactly where he is at any time. Or in this example from DreamWorks, it actually happens inside an eyeball, which is not part of the concept of iFix, but I thought it was just interesting. And it's funny, I actually looked through a lot of clips from DreamWorks stuff, and this is the only example I could find. It's really sloppy the way they do it, because they don't plan things in continuity as much as shot per shot. So it's hard to keep track of things in their films. Things just fly away and move too fast on the screen. Some of the fight sequences are amazing, but they take longer to read than they should. Let's go to another concept, frame within a frame. Wes Anderson is very known for this. It's, you know, you can use it for comedy, you can use it for in other ways, but you can do a lot of interesting things with this. So let me show you a few examples. It's just very unique ways to tell a story. So in this case, you can isolate or trap or confine something and separate things in a composition, but at the same time, you can use a frame within a frame to bring things together. So you can use it for the exact opposite purpose. But these shots are amazing. There's multiple frames playing with each other and trying to use that to tell a story in a different way. Go to another example. So in this clip, you can see how he's moving almost like a caged animal. He's like a panther, just like not knowing where to go. And she has all the power. There's this whole thing with stripes in this film also that signify like, you know, entrapment and like a cage. And then what she does is, in order to fully trap him, is her sensuality is what keeps him in there. And it should come in about a second here. Come on, famous shot. There it goes. So that is the frame. Her legs are his cage. He can't escape that. There's a whole other play with water and symbolism with sexuality here that's amazing in this movie. You guys should check it out. It's The Graduate, by the way. And a few more examples. I think that was Rosemary's Baby, trying to basically occlude things on purpose. Yeah. And then, what's the name of this one? The Mood for Love? Yeah, American Beauty. How the actual lines become a literal cage in front of his face. His shitty desk job is what he can't escape and he needs to break out from. And using glasses, there's a million examples you can go here with the AI. Oops, lost HDMI. Come on, HDMI, come back. Are you there? There we go.
Hey.
Okay, so it's just a cable. Okay, so on AI, he is the light, he is this, mechanical perfection and is framed within that perfect ground light. Again, another example with reflections and multiple levels. You can create depth or, separate or bring things together very easily with this technique. Let's switch to point of view or POV shots. So this is from Todo sobre mi madre, an Almodóvar film. And the problem with POV shots is that it's very easy to bring the audience out of the movie because you become that character. And what you want to try to do is only use it for either main characters or for a very specific moment. In this case, we're actually never on the point of view of the son that is dying here. It's all about the mother. But we have to see her face. That is the point of the shot. It's about her grief. The whole movie is about her dealing with the death of her son. And it's handled very, very well here, how the cameraman was probably rolling with some extra camera support people and just getting the right feel perfectly. And but yeah, one of the main problems I see usually in animated films is that we switch to a POV shot at any moment from any character, and it feels like, why am I feeling like this character doesn't matter and I don't connect at all with? Let's switch to long takes. So there's a bunch of Mexican directors now using a lot of this. So Cuarón, Iñárritu, and Del Toro a little bit, not as much, but it's a kind of a great way to show off and to be in the moment when you're having a take where there's no cuts at all. Everything just goes on and feels very loose and reactive, like you are really there and there's no. And this is one of many shots in Children of Men that does that. And it's basically there's nowhere to go. You're always with the character. I believe that blood on the lens was actually not on purpose. It just happened in the moment when they were spraying stuff, and it just looks amazing. And I cut this short because it was way too long to show on this presentation, but there's a whole bunch of these. So I think a long take is very useful if you want to make someone feel like they belong to that space and there's no way out until you give them a breather. So the way the scene ends is amazing. Once they find the baby, I believe it's just finally you get a cut and you feel this, I'm out, I can breathe again. It's like this long action thing. But it doesn't need to be action. Like Shawshank's Redemption here, if you look, it's so perfectly planned out. And one thing we always try to do is motivate the camera movement, so it's not just moving for the sake of moving. In this case, it's revealing some information. As we pull back, we get this masterful composition, and we're only going to switch once the security guard starts moving to the right. Then the camera guy is going to adjust and follow through. You're gonna see all, tell the full story, see everything here. Then we get Morgan Freeman. He's obviously in power, he's big in the frame. We understand what he's feeling, and we understand how much power he has over those security guards in the background. And everything is set up, every composition is planned out, and every time the camera moves is with a purpose. Talking about high versus low. Stay there. Let's see. There. I sped this clip up because it was very slow, but it actually works so well when it's super slow. So when we're talking about high angles versus low angles, it's again about a power dynamic. And in this situation, in James Bond, the bad guy comes towards the camera starts aiming up, so he's obviously the guy in power. Then when we shoot a reverse shot on Bond, he is shot from above, shooting down. Then we switch back and forth, but the thing is, this scene is about persuasion. He wants to be down to his level to be able to convince him. And so he just pulls a chair, then the camera goes down with him. It's very easy to set up stuff like this instead of just having two people talking, try to have them move around and figure out what the power dynamic should be and use the props to support that story. When we talk about camera shake, in animation this is very important because we do it all manually, try to replicate like how much rotation in z-axis or x-axis and what frequency do we have for, you know, an F1 car versus an airplane or something. So we are very specific with that sort of thing. And in this case, sometimes camera shake is actually used to obscure things, and that is the whole point, purpose. So in a way, is what we want to say is we don't understand what's going on the screen. In this case from 7, we don't know who the killer is, the protagonist doesn't know who the killer is, and the audience shouldn't know at all. So we obscure everything using camera shake, and that's the whole point of working with this style. And shutter angle, it's a little harder to explain this. This is a very famous one from Saving Private Ryan. It's basically when you are shooting film, it's hard to explain technically, but you get more motion blur with certain settings on the camera, and the normal settings are kind of blurry, but you can make that look a lot sharper frame by frame. So it's looking almost like a series of still images, and that's what creates this very jagged, gritty effect on the film. And digitally, this is easier to do nowadays. Before that, it used to be about the opening on the actual shutter of the camera, on film cameras. So this is very well known for that, but you can use it also in different ways, so it doesn't need to be a film technique, but I love this example how strobing lights basically work as a very narrow shadow angle. And the whole idea is we're basically seeing a series of flashes of images that showcase moments of grief or despair, and each one is imprinted in your brain separately. It's not like a continuous scene, but it's a whole bunch of individual moments of terror. Alright, let's move to other stuff. So camera orbits. This is very abused nowadays because it's very cheap to set up little rigs and make your films look a little more high budget by just rotating the camera constantly. If you do it right, like here in this example from the fall, it's like there's this whole moment of tension where there's these killers approaching, and everything is about circles and circular motion, and the orbit will not stop until we actually reveal the killers coming into the frame at the end. So it's basically transitioning from one type of motion to another entirely, but it's feeling like you are surrounded by something and there's something potentially behind you at any moment, and then you finally stop when you need to reveal what it is about. Zollies or dolly zooms, this is a famous version of this. By now it's like overdone. If you see something like this nowadays, it'll be kind of cliche-ish, but the idea is you are moving the camera forward or backwards and adjusting the lens to match the size of the character that you had in frame to where it was if you hadn't moved the camera. And it creates this sense of the background receding or sometimes coming towards you. And it's basically, it's famous in the film Vertigo because it causes that sense of vertigo, as you're feeling that something is off and your whole environment is just pulling out from yourself. And it's more basically to create a sense of unease, but we try not to overdo it. Probably once or twice in every film that we make, we might have one, and it might be very subtle. Ratatouille did it very well. They had probably a dozen shots that have zollies that are almost unnoticeable. It's just very, very, very subtle stuff. And then screen direction. So because I cannot show Disney-related stuff, let's imagine a hypothetical film where characters are, let's say, traveling left to right. Let's say like they're moving away from home or something. So the idea is that if you're having your characters move left to right through your film, and that is the goal, you keep that direction consistent throughout, let's say, an act or maybe even a scene. And it can break down in smaller chunks, but in general, you should have a feeling that everything is going in one direction. Once things change and it's time to return home to reclaim your kingdom or whatever, then you can switch the screen direction in general. That doesn't mean that every single shot needs to be in this way, but the general progression should feel correct in that sense. And again, it helps with clarity. You don't need to respect these rules. Actually, most live action films don't deal with this at all. They just shoot whatever they can to get the best coverage from different angles. But in animation, because we have so much control, we tend to do a lot of this. Let's go to a little more editorial stuff. Cut on action. So if you see among all these shots, the moment the cut happens is always at the most dynamic moment in the action. And that is simply because it eases the cut. It makes it so easy to read. You don't need to worry about where your eyes are. You're just following. And it goes very fast. Which is kind of similar, but different from a jump cut. This is something we try to avoid in filmmaking most of the time, is cutting to something that is way too similar and it doesn't quite tell you anything new. In this case, it was used to basically show the passage of time. It's almost like a time lapse. So you can use it on purpose. If you do it, like if you're just cutting from this shot to something slightly similar but it's not quite there, it will just feel weird. There's a couple different ways that you can do it right. Let me show you one that works for me. I like this one of the rings. The jump cut is just for impact. You don't need to be closer. You already can see her face. It's already a close-up. But just having that punch in really sells it. It's a very important moment in the film, and it was probably shot a few times on a different camera because it looks like a different lens, so they did this on purpose just to cut it in like that. And similar, again, it's a match cut. Match cut is more conceptual. So it's basically matching something conceptually, an idea for that action. In this case, we basically remove 3,000 years of, wait, no, more than that. This has to be like, what, 200,000 years, I don't know. All the way to old civilization, we don't need to say anything else. There's tools, there's space. That's all we need to say. There's a bone, there's a tool in space. So it's a way to link. Oops, mic drop again. Find another question?
Hey, no one asked for a microphone.
All right. Give it a second. This always bothered me, by the way, this shot, because everyone says it's so masterfully done. It doesn't quite match. They could have shot it a little better and cut it a little better. I mean, Kubrick is great.
Yeah, that's what I mean,
Yeah, like throw a bone 10 times, waste a little more film, and get the one that actually matches the position of your spaceship, or reshoot your spaceship. I don't know.
Oh, that's a spaceship. I thought it was a gun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's close up, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's like they recycled some footage in there, and they used what they had in the editorial at the time, I guess. But it could have been done better. I wonder if they actually found this cut in editorial, or if they did it conceptually while shooting. I'm guessing because it's Kubrick, he knew what he wanted. He probably just didn't have the coverage and used what he had at the moment. Alright, one more second till I get a mic. Or if you really guys can hear me, I can keep going until we get a mic. Are you okay on the very back? Totally okay or just kind of okay? Okay, I'll try to project a little more. And if we get a mic, we get it. If not, I'll just continue for now. So another example of a match cut. Because these are conceptually, this is a little more comedic. It's basically matching motion and matching the concept. Again, in this film, water symbolizes sex all the time, so it's a perfect transition from one thing to the other. I love that combination. Okay, so I'll move on to another concept for a minute. So flat staging, it's if you think of like a comedy, it's almost like a sitcom, like a stage play. If you frame things flat, in a way you are expecting a joke to happen, and this is just a cultural thing that we've seen a lot of these sitcoms, and we've seen a lot of vaudeville shows and stuff like that. So sometimes when we have a film that everything is dynamic, suddenly the shot becomes kind of flat and straight lines everywhere. It's almost forecasting a joke is coming, get ready, and your brain is just like in this different state of mind, and suddenly just snaps. And I don't know why it works, but it works. We try this a lot in editorial and animation. It's like we use more dynamic shots, and they are not as funny as when you just flatten everything out. And again, Wes Anderson uses this all the time in his films. It's mostly comedy all the time, and for him it's just composition and comedy and everything in one place.
Probably simpler for your brain to take in rather than having a dynamic having
Yeah, it's easier to read. It's a very clear, easy read. There's left and right, and there's no depth almost. So Hmm?
Yeah, comic strip.
A comic strip, yeah, as well. Though comic strips can, well, comics are very dynamic. Comic strips definitely have that flat feeling, yeah. And then move on to, this is basically, you know, Wes Anderson again uses, sorry, this is Edgar Wright, not Wes Anderson. Uses it more for comedic effect. They used to be used more for dynamism, but nowadays it's like, it's so overdone that, you know, it became a cliche, so it's just zooming in on pointless things just because it makes it funny. Go to another one, whip pan or swish pan, depends on who you talk to. In this case, this acts as a cut, but it's not really a cut. And the difference that makes is that it makes you not leave the space, and it makes you feel like you're there. If you look at this is actually, the cameraman is fucking nuts. I don't know how he stops so fast and in the perfect location just by a few tap on the shoulder. Do we have one? No. Okay. I'll keep screaming for a bit. But yeah, it's basically, this could work pretty well with a cut, but you will feel like you're in two different places. Over here, you feel like you are really present in a moment and you are part of the action. Move on to rack focus. Most people probably are familiar with this. It's basically just changing the focal plane of the camera to reveal information. Sometimes you use it to obscure information, like in this one actually you don't know that this is the barrel of a gun until the very end, and it's revealing and concealing information both. So it's basically the director telling you, I want you to know this now, and at some point, I'm gonna give you more. And this one from The Graduate, I think this is the best rack focus I've ever seen. It's like when she finally finds out that they've been screwing each other, basically. We rack to the back, and we're in his POV, and then she turns, and we do not rack back to her, which would be the logical thing to do for a cameraman. And it's almost like we can't face that fear at the moment. We've just been shocked, and I can't look you in the eyes, and I'm gonna slowly drift back and be able to confront that moment. I don't see any films nowadays doing stuff like this, and I think sometimes because it hasn't been used as much, people are afraid to use it because they think it'll be weird, but this is what gets taught in school later, like when you take risks and do something different with it. This is a very subtle one. It's lens breathing. It's something we do in animation. We actually just started doing it in the last 2 films at Disney. It's whenever you change the focus on a camera, there's actually a little change in the focal length of the camera for most lenses. Sometimes it looks like it zooms in, sometimes out. Depends a little bit. Yeah.
How do you do that then?
How?
How?
In animation, we just fake it. We just zoom in or out manually. So.
Well, films, how do you do it? 'Cause I've seen it in films where...
You don't do it. It's actually a part of the technical construction of the lens. When you're changing the focal plane,
Okay.
the optical elements shift a little bit and actually changes your zoom. So.
But if you don't have something to turn, is there any way you can do it?
No, you would use a zoom lens, basically a zoom and a focus separately. You could take it. That's kind of what we do in animation, just 2 controllers separately. But in animation, we set this up manually. I tested a whole bunch of lenses and I measured the focus breathing and try to match that in our rigs and stuff like that for Disney. So it just makes it feel a little more alive and less mechanical. Otherwise, things get sharper and it just looks odd, like nothing moved. It's more organic. Short sighting. This is a new one I learned just probably about a year ago. I always knew about this, but I didn't know how to explain it to people. Basically, if you think the short side of the screen, if a person is looking towards the shorter side, in this case the left, that is what short sighting means. And in this case, it's almost like feeling awkward, misplaced, or like you don't belong in that space. And it also can help you focus on backgrounds. Like, there's a clip on the social network where, oh, thank you. Hello. Is that working or not? I can't tell. Okay. I'll talk really deep into it because otherwise, I guess I can do it like this. So like in the social network, even though Eisenberg is in the foreground, there's a lot happening in the background. So short-sighting him is basically saying he's not aware of the information happening behind him. It's used constantly, but people don't tend to talk about it too much. It's just they think more about composition than how it tells a different story by using this technique. We talk about aspect ratios like Wes Anderson again. I use a lot of examples because he takes risks with a lot of things. It's basically changing the screen aspect ratio from being very wide to being narrow in this case. And wide meaning the present and narrow being the past, because in the past we used to shoot in 4:3 ratios or different ratios like that. Yeah?
Brother Bear did that, right?
Sorry?
The movie Brother Bear did that.
Brother Bear did it, yes.
Change it to a bear,
When you change to a bear, finally
very
everything
nice
expands,
control,
yeah. That was a very good use.
That was
Or
more vibrant and close
yeah.
too.
The Dark Knight also, and Nolan uses that quite often because he expands to the full IMAX size of things when he shoots in IMAX. But can also be used kind of comedically. Scott Pilgrim, like it transitions to some weird stuff and kind of creates a dynamic effect during fights. It just becomes like this sharpening, like almost like you're squinting at the screen and just focus. And if you overdo it, like you go to a super extreme ratio, it just becomes kind of silly, but in a good way. And you can also break things with this. Life of Pi, and then the other one was up. Is this one good? All right. Wow. Okay. Now I'm gonna keep it really far away. Okay. So in Life of Pi and Oz, what they do is they break that. They change the aspect ratio temporarily just to have more room to break the frame and have a feeling that you are actually popping out on the screen. So it's a really nice effect. Actually, I watched Life of Pi in 2D, and I didn't know that they were doing that. I just felt fish flying by me, but I didn't know they were doing this technique until much later when I saw it online. And there's some stuff that doesn't have a name. So one second, like for example, this from Contact is, I decided I would give this technique a name because it doesn't have one, and I don't think anyone else will ever do it again anyway, but whatever. So if you look at this shot, how magical and weird and perfect it is. And actually it's much longer than what I'm showing here. It goes on this whole thing with reflections and other things later. But what they actually did here is use some masking and clever, green screening to be able to create that, basically remove the cameraman from the shot and then composite it with another take entirely. But yeah, you can do magical things with the camera where you are sometimes there, you are sometimes distant from the moment, and blending those things together is great. And then there's one I actually learned just a few weeks ago in a presentation at Disney, which I included in this presentation here. Frisson is basically goosebumps, or the skin orgasm, some people say. Like that thing where I don't know how many of you probably felt that before, where you get goosebumps from something very emotional. It's supposed to be about 94% of people, I believe, that feel that. The other ones, I don't know what's wrong with them, but it's an awesome thing. And we had a presentation of this animator that was exploring these concepts. It's basically 3 presentations, an hour long each, to kind of explore how this happens and what specific things like raising volume, raising tempo, or diminishing it, or cutting rhythm, or aesthetic beauty. There's a whole bunch of things that can cause this. And if you know what you're wanting, imagine you're the director, I can say, this is the Frisson moment. How do we get there? Okay, give me more tempo, give me more of that. If you can specify it, you can be much better off. Yeah, go ahead. That was the girl was from Contact. Yeah. So this will require an entire separate talk, probably multiple talks to discuss, but I thought I'd throw it in just to get an idea. Like that's a nice term that I want to learn more about. So what this all leads us to is basically, for me, it's all about clarity. That's the only constant that we can objectively say that we're looking for. So we have rules, but we can break them if that will create more clarity for what we want to express. It can be clarity of concepts, clarity of ideas, or meaning, or visual clarity, anything you want. And if you break those rules, if you don't do it on purpose, if you just do it because you are a terrible filmmaker, then you get mayhem. And we actually use this term. We actually say, give me more mayhem, and this is what it means. Total chaos, nothing makes sense, things fly by the screen, the cutting pattern doesn't matter, we don't know whose POV it is, why we're close, when we're far, things shake, there's always foreground things, always, the camera's always orbiting, and it's just horrible, and it makes billions of dollars. So I don't know what I'm talking about, obviously, but I think this is terrible, but somehow it sells. But you can do worse. You can be a really good filmmaker and still fall in these traps. I don't know if any of you are fans of this, but the Wachowskis, I think, really screwed up on stuff like this. Can anyone tell me what is actually happening?
Oh,
Like, who is in front of what and why are people screaming, why is, who the fuck was, yeah. All you know at the end is that he crossed the finish line, and I guess he won, because Jim Goodman is gonna be very happy. And there's explosions, yeah, there you go. So, visually stunning, but there's no clarity at all. If what you wanted was to confuse the audience, you achieved that. If what you wanted was adrenaline, maybe you achieved that, but no understanding of what is actually happening on screen.
Jeffrey.
So yeah, it's pure style. It sacrifices so much potential, I think, in something like this. I want to move on to something else. Pareidolia is basically when you perceive patterns and things that are not really there. We are kind of built to see faces and things that, sorry? Huh? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Thank you. Push this in a bit more. Okay, so we're kind of set up to see things, faces especially, and then see patterns and things that are not there. And that kind of screws up with things like perceiving different concepts like the ones I've been describing before. And we can fall into some that are not actually useful, might be actually detrimental to learning and talking about things. So when we end up with this, so I'm very opinionated about this stuff. If you look at this clip, this guy masterfully, figure out the secret compositions of this film somehow by adding a ton of numbers everywhere. It becomes this nuts, crazy conspiracy theory. To me, the rule of thirds is simply saying, do not put things in the center. More on the left, more on the right. That will create a sense of imbalance, and somehow it will, work with your compositions. If you actually measure any composition out there that people say this is a perfect third, it is not. It is bullshit. Sometimes they put it on the eyeball, sometimes the other eyeball, sometimes the nose, sometimes the back of the head. You will find that pattern if that's what you're looking for. And we talk about this even at very high level in the studio, and I always call it out, like, don't call it a third, just say offset or whatever. Pick something else, because when you start talking about thirds, people really start measuring things and think, this is going to save my composition, this is going to make it better. And when you fall into this is from the same guy. I love how nuts he is. Golden spiral, golden ratio. It's about the same. Actually, a golden ratio is 1.6182, I think. 2/3 will be 1.666. So visually, most people will not be able to tell the difference, but some people claim the golden ratio is this most beautiful, perfect thing. Some studies have been done where they actually show that if they make someone pick a golden rectangle versus other ones, they don't think that a golden rectangle is actually any pretty. But it's been claimed by art people for the longest time, so they keep repeating the same thing. To me, it's simply, again, there's some beauty in asymmetry, if that's what you're looking for. There's beauty in symmetry, if that's what you're looking for. And even things like the Nautilus spiral, which is the one example that everyone uses for the perfect golden ratio, is not a golden spiral. It's just another spiral with another ratio. And you can find spirals everywhere, and the majority of them will not be a golden spiral, but people all just think that every spiral is a golden spiral because they expect it to be beautiful. So at that point, you might as well just, line it up like that. It really doesn't matter. Yeah, and I'm very, very opinionated about this shit. And the same thing is, it's not just golden ratio, golden spiral, all this stuff, but there's this just yearning for finding the secret of composition, and every scene is going to be different, and everything will be balanced differently. And like there's this app for the iPhone that you can basically put overlays on things before or after taking pictures, and it'll make you discover how magical your composition was. And it's like, this is actually from their own ads. Like, why the fuck do they cross that in the center on the left there? It's like, I see more diagonal, I see more curves. You can do whatever you want, you can perceive whatever you want, and then you'll think you are right. I don't know, the gravity one is actually, there's definitely a circle there, so congrats, you figured that out. I think Pan's Labyrinth here, I don't know, I see more of circular shape, and the horizon is actually lower than where they have it, and there's 3 columns, not 1. So whatever you want to do, you're going to find your own version of that if you keep looking for it. A couple more examples. I think they're all ridiculous. You can put lines anywhere you want. Actually, the triangle from The Graduate, that is true. If there's a nice triangular composition, that is very valid. I don't know why they put the line in the middle. It's like, it's important to cut it right in the neck. I don't know. It's just random lines. So I picked up one of their examples. It's original, the top left. And I overlaid a whole bunch of the other grids to show how ridiculous this is. It's like you can do whatever you want, you're always gonna be able to find a pattern if you look for it. Right, I'll move on to something else. Speaking of triangles, we see a lot of this, people talking about triangular compositions and stuff like that. A triangle composition is fine. You can have something based on a pyramid or triangular, that's fine. But when you're talking about three things in screen space and you start trying to draw lines through them and try to discover what's special about it, well, guess what? If you draw 3 points anywhere, you'll always get a triangle unless they're in a perfect straight line. So you're always going to find that magic thing. And look at how ridiculous this is. This is actually from people analyzing films. That's what they come up with. These are twos, those are threes, those are twos, and somehow these are interconnected because magic. And actually, I got taught a lot of this in school. There's a lot of famous books that show you things like this, and you start thinking, okay, this is something I need to understand, and I need to, somehow I don't get it, but if I try hard enough, maybe I will. The reality is that maybe the teachers were wrong at some point. There's some value to some of these things, but you gotta figure out where it is and how to apply it properly. And some of the stuff maybe it's better to just move away from. So I wanna just give a quick recap. So there's a whole bunch of new terms. So the idea for me is like, try to just absorb a bunch of these things. And every studio might be different, schools will be different, books will be different, but if you kind of have an idea, you can probably figure out how to find the synonyms, translate them somehow. And yeah, it's like when people say, that Spielberg look. If you're a filmmaker, you should try to figure out, what does that mean? Is it the way that the camera moves forward and then up and tilts up? Is it the depth of field? Is it the lighting? If you try to break it down into its components, you'll be able to actually pinpoint that. And there's a bunch of places online where you can actually learn some of this. The majority I actually could not find much information on. I wrote it myself. These are some really good YouTube channels. And I actually wanted to leave this slide up during, I'm gonna have some questions after this, so if you guys want to take a picture of this, feel free to, like, you can come in, I'll leave this slide on for quite a while, so it should be fine. But anyway, I hope the terms make some sense and that you learn something new, and I'll open it to questions if you guys have anything out, and then we have probably, about 10 minutes or so, and I'll just hang out here, feel free to take photos, and that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
You know, like with 3D, I found that like some people are masterful at it. So you can go to the cinema and watch it in 3D, and it's amazing. And then you buy the DVD, and it's still pretty good. Or with some films, you can actually notice which parts of the 3D by how they've angled the camera.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can change the camera, that's basically you controlling the narrative. And that's, to me, is a different type of filmmaking, and it's a very valid way of telling stories, but not exactly what we normally try to do, because as a filmmaker, I prefer to control the experience. It's like a choose your own adventure. You think you're choosing, but it's been pre-written by someone, and these are the paths that you might take, and it's kind of pre-developed. But I'm not a big fan of that because it leaves, I don't know, too much open where you're not able to actually control what the audience will experience. The same with VR. So far I haven't seen something that's really engaging because I get distracted too much. So I think we need a new film language to develop that a little better, and that's kind of coming very, very slowly. It's going to take a while, though, I think. Questions? Yeah.
Some of these look very effective to me, like calculation group. Some of them are interesting effects, like through the looking contrast, but how much of this do you think the average audience notices, and how much is just fun for us as artists?
Yes, because she's asking about how much of these effects does the audience actually perceive versus how much is just filmmakers or people interested in film. I think as among filmmakers, we'll be able to talk about it. The general audience will probably never even notice that something was there. But if you look in general, the films that do better are the ones that are told better, because they are clearer, the audience gets it, the audience feels the emotion that they're supposed to feel. They have no idea what's going on and why they're being kind of brainwashed into feeling these things, but it's very, very effective. Just play the first 10 minutes of Up and you're gonna have someone crying. And why is that? Because they did it the right way, The audience will not know what a jump cut was between this time period versus that, or a match cut here or there, but it's there. They'll feel it at least. Questions?
So when you talk about failure and conversation with everything, how does through like color grading, how does color in general affect what you use so the dance and parts say what suits on the composition because you are looking to see what's happening there. How do you tackle that?
You're talking about specifically like being too dark or too bright? And like, are you talking about the Battle Winterfell specifically, or?
All about the color, there's a white color,
Mm-hmm.
and we do a different kind of composition. How does that take away from the composition a lot, or does that make it?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Like, there's different color palettes that you can use to influence different emotions, but there are some ingrained things like warm and cool. We feel warm is a little more, warm and inviting, but you can shift that entirely. You can make it hellish and terrifying. You somehow set your symbolism early on in a film if you can, whether it's with color or shape language or cutting pattern even. Like or like the Jaws theme, you hear the little strings and you're terrified, and that will go throughout the whole film. Even if nothing happens, you'll be terrified every time you hear it. So I think it's something that's very malleable. You can play with and make a color mean something positive or negative depending on how you treat it. The same with dark or bright. Sometimes the brightest things can be the scariest things in a movie, and sometimes the darkness will be scary. So I don't know. It changes from film to film. That's one thing that's very interesting to try to figure out. A director that knows how to change the meaning of something that's kind of culturally ingrained. More questions?
A lot of the examples that you use are sourced in the time historical films. You know how Edgar Wright is pushing a lot and that's a very good thing. Do you think that can happen for animation directors as well? Because you don't really get animation to connect with something like that.
Yeah, in animation, unfortunately it's not explored that much because it's harder to get a director's vision as clear as when you have Edgar Wright directing. Because you have multiple directors that are working with a screenwriter or multiple screenwriters. The screenplay goes to a story team. The story team does the storyboards, kind of based on a vague idea what the director has. And it kind of breaks the cycle in a way. It's not that direct. The directors have too much more to take care of. So it's really hard to find someone that can keep that style consistent. And I think there's another issue, which is we deal with sometimes at this need to as basically producers and fear of trying something new. We know that the technique and we know what works. And I know now that we're kind of shifting gears a lot. The studio, we're going to try a lot of new things, which I think is positive. Because we had a particular style that went on for quite too long, and hopefully that will change. But it's really hard to get that unique vision. But I'm hoping that they'll be able to do it more. I think with anime, some directors have managed to keep. Yeah, but Miyazaki is great, and I hear that he basically tortures his workers because he has a very clear idea what he wants, and it's not until it's perfect that he's gonna let it go. So, but yeah, that's the only way to do it. Have someone that is an author and knows exactly what he wants. Yeah, absolutely. Questions? You first.
Yeah. Hi. I am a writer, and I was just wondering when cinematographers are working, do they? Is it more important to basically work to set the scene, or work with the specific dialogue with the characters?
She's talking about if for a cinematographer it's more important to basically set the scene and composition or work with the dialogue of the characters. I think dialogue is pretty secondary, I think, at least for composition. I think we use it more for cutting pattern and layout and editorial. We can probably, the idea is that if there was no sound, would this make sense visually? So if you turn it off entirely, does this camera angle represent what that dialogue would have said? Like, is it threatening? Is it what? Is this camera move the right thing? Is the way you compose a shot? So we kind of try to ignore the sound a lot. I actually work without sound entirely for a lot of my shots, just to try to get the right feel first. And then throw some soundtrack on top, and you can just very easily make it do whatever you want. But yeah, we don't, I think the editor is the one that worries more about fitting the dialogue with the right amount of length for the shots, but it's not, layout we don't worry too much. Cinematographers, I would probably, live action cinematographers would probably cover everything long and leave enough room for the editor to work on later. Speak up a little. I can hear you very well. Can you speak up a little? Oh.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
This might fall more towards like post-production compared to cinematography, but you know when films here like remastered, like in the aspect ratio here, strict 4:3.
Yeah.
So I remember watching Harry Potter, the first one is like strict 4:3 ratio.
Yeah.
Then I watched the Blu-rays, it's stretched to like 16:9.
Yeah, I know I do.
How do you do that without like just
And it's talking about changing camera ratios for like when you have a 235 film and you cut it down to a 16:9 or a 4:3 for airplanes or for other devices and stuff like that. And I think that's just basically destroying the film. It's like when you grab someone's artwork and just chop it off. And to be honest, there was a point in time where that was considered in the compositions, like let's not go too far on the edge of the frame because we won't be able to see anything. Nowadays we're like, fuck it, let's make the best film possible. And if someone wants to watch the shitty version of the film, let them watch the shitty version, it's gonna be crap. And let that department worry about how they're gonna do it. So they have to choose this side or that side or do the pan scan thing where they move the camera, fake a camera movement here and there. And to me it looks like crap. I can definitely sense that. You're losing a lot of information. Obviously the frame is this wide for a reason and there's information everywhere. But I hate it personally. And we do worry about it a little bit at the end of the production. Every once in a while someone says like, we need this shot to fit within this range for some marketing purpose. And we're like, okay, we'll get you that shot, but the rest of the film stays as it is.
On continuing what he said, like do companies sometimes have the 16:9, or they have to compact it for 4:3? Because I think it's with Blu-rays, you unpack it so that the quality is a lot higher, but when it's on a normal DVD, you have to compress some stuff to, like say, you lose some of the image quality.
Yeah, I mean, there's also image amount of pixels that you're working with. So nowadays, at least, there's not much to worry about with that. Like most people will watch in 1080p because it's easy to stream and all that. But also, most people will watch on their phones, unfortunately. So you gotta be ready for that. You're not gonna have the full experience. We actually, every time we do reviews for our movies, we go to a theater with a big screen and look at it that way. When I'm working on my screen, and even though I have a nice 4K screen where I'm working on, I think everything looks right, and I look at it in the big screen, it's like, oh my god, that eyeball is gigantic. I gotta zoom out a little bit. This is just nuts. So we change a lot of things after watching it on the big screen because that's what we designed the experience for. But not every experience will match that.
In 3D animation, do you have storyboard artists and layout artists?
Yes, we have story and layout are totally separate in animation, in major studios at least. Because the storyboard is purely 2D drawings. They deliver to the editorial department. Editorial does a preliminary cut with some temp sound effects and everything else, some temp dialogue. And at that point we take it and convert it into, or make a first version that is 3D basically. But we don't have to respect the storyboards. We follow as a guideline and we come up with our own shots, say this is not working, I'm gonna change it entirely or combine shots. And even sometimes the storyboard artist sometimes gets something like this, and they fight and this guy wins. That's the screenplay. And they have to come up with a fun way to do that. And sometimes the storyboard artist cannot figure it out because it's something too complex that involves a lot of buildings or technical things that are hard to draw. So they give us a couple sketches of key moments that story-wise mean a lot. And in layout we have to figure out how the hell do we do that. So an example, have you guys seen Wreck-It Ralph 2?
Not yet.
No? Oh. a little spoilery, but not much. But there's a big fight close to the end with a big red pin. That's all I'm gonna say. I got that sequence entirely, and it was basically this building needs to fall, and this needs to be the ending of how the fight ends between these two characters. And there was nothing else. Like there was a couple key moments, like this person needs to be rescued at this point. We don't know how or from where. And so I blocked in a whole bunch of different action shit, falling and exploding, and came out with my own shots. And then it just got dumped and try a new version, dumped and try a new version until we got right to the final one. And it's like, there were no boards at that point because we ran out of time. Board artists were doing other things. And layout is, sometimes it's easier to block in a layout with something very actiony and very full of environmental stuff.
Have you ever done the storyboarding, or have you just done layout?
I've done storyboarding only for my own films, short films. And I actually applied for storyboarding positions at DreamWorks and Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and I got rejected from all of them because my layout stuff is definitely stronger than my board stuff. I can draw very well, but that doesn't mean that you're a good boarding artist. It's about economy of line and about clear storytelling and expression and stuff like that. Doing realistic drawings doesn't necessarily help you with that, so I couldn't transition quite well in there.
Thank you.
More questions?
You know, like with lip sync, I know nowadays you've got technology where, like say for example, you've got the English version, and then you'll
Yeah.
have like Spanish, French version.
No, for us is lip sync is we always just work with the English version in animation, and let basically the lips will be out of sync for every other version. It's way too expensive to re-render everything, so yeah, we don't bother with that.
Because I think it said Zootropolis,
Mhm.
or Zootopia.
Yes, and Zootropolis, when they say the word Zootropolis, they might have redone a couple frames of a syllable here
Well,
and
it's
there,
been left in.
and that's it. Yeah.
When you say Zootopia, when he pronounces Zootropolis, it's
Oh, the lips
still
are off
saying-
actually. Yeah, I haven't seen the
Still saying
Zootropolis version.
Zootopia.
Yeah. Anyway, if you guys have more questions, I think just wanna come and ask me here. It should be fine, and I think that should be it. I really appreciate you guys coming. I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much.